so, could this be the new front in our culture wars? Could it be a boon to the Prime Minister? Or not? And while Rowling has escaped any action, who else might be caught up by this new law? Well, here to discuss that, Conservative Party National Chair Rachel Maclean, and for his take on the electoral implications of the row, Delta Polls Director Joe Twyman. So, Rachel, if I may come to you first. When it comes to dealing with these matters, you yourself, you've had a run-in with a so-called hate incident. After a row with a Green Party candidate, you had a non-crime hate incident recorded against you. Now, you've had it scrubbed from your record. How hard was that to achieve?
It was quite hard. I was very lucky. I had the support of an amazing organisation called the Free Speech Union, who generously assisted me, but it was very technical. There were a lot of complicated documents to fill in, and the law itself is very complicated in this area. So I think that this, as you've just heard the Prime Minister say, is completely the wrong priority for Scotland, which after all is the same country as England, where I am now. And what we see there, of course, is a sort of progressive left-wing party bringing this type of legislation instead of focusing on things that people really care about.
OK, let me ask you, though, can someone born biologically in one sex transition to another?
No, I don't think they can. You can have someone who wants to be transgender. They can't change sex.
OK, so a traditional definition, though, of transphobia would be a refusal to address someone by their preferred pronouns. Do you accept that?
No, I don't. I don't think. I mean, I think this is where we get into this nonsense straight away, as you said. I mean, clearly it's polite and it's considerate if people are undergoing a process and they have asked to be addressed by the pronoun of the sex that they're transitioning into, then, obviously we should try and do that. But the idea that you're going to criminalise somebody for doing that wrongly or not respecting or, not doing that purely out of a mistake or even out of a belief that someone can't change sex. And I think, of course, you then come to the issue of children, young people, teachers in schools. You're all of a sudden into a complicated web of rules that are extremely difficult and have a very difficult and negative effect on people just trying to be polite to each other.
But then also, wouldn't you say that the flip side to that is that there are distinct negative effects to those who wish to transition? I can't pretend that I understand it fully, but I can understand prejudice in our society, that if you demonise somebody for who they are and how they wish to live their lives, you may think, for whatever reason, that biological sex is something that you're born with and that's it. There may be other people who have a very different view, and by you taking your views, particularly in the political arena or J.K. Rowling in the public arena, it could be extremely offensive and very damaging to that individual.
No, I think we're mixing up two different things here, if I may. I always like to think I conduct myself with politeness and respect to people, even though I strongly disagree with the idea that you can actually change your biological sex. That is completely different from saying that we should have a law that would criminalise me from saying these things. And I think where we're going to get to with this is genuinely, we're going to have a situation where people are tripping over themselves. And the end result is that this sort of hate crime law has not made anybody safer. What we're seeing in Scotland is a complete lack of policing on basic police priorities such as burglary and antisocial behaviour. Those things are not being addressed because the police are getting wound up and tied up with policing things that are going on inside people's heads. And if I can make the final point, actually Britain as a whole, if you look at the statistics, is an incredibly tolerant country. We've seen much less hate crime, as even on the definitions that we're discussing here, over the past 10 years, because people are simply very tolerant to each other. And individual people in neighbourhoods and in their communities are by and large pretty decent and tolerant to each other and don't mind what on earth people do in their own time and in their own houses. But what they do object to is being policed and told that they're saying the wrong thing, and they object to this environment where if they make one false step, they're suddenly arrested.
I do understand, the arguments over free speech, and I dare say that everybody, whether it's here, applying common sense, applying free speech is very important. That having been said, how do we have a sensible conversation in this nation about this particular issue? On the basis that if we go back to the 80s, there was considerable lack of tolerance of gay people, of same-sex relationships, and then, of course, of same-sex marriage. Certainly, 10 years ago, conducting radio shows as I did, the amount of people who were prepared to ring in and say a marriage should be between a man and a woman, and that's it. It should never be allowed to be between two people of the same sex. It's, the Bible didn't say Adam and Steve and all that stuff. We've got beyond that because we've had a sensible conversation. The nation's moved on. But when it comes to trans issues, it would appear that it's so toxic that we can't actually have a conversation that means that we end up treating individuals who are in the middle with respect and coming up with rules and legislation that make sense to the likes of you and I when it comes to dealing with free speech.
Your point is well made. We obviously have to have a sensible conversation about it. And I think by and large, we do have protections for people who wish to transition to live in a different gender. What we cannot do and what we must not do is insist that people like me who don't think it's possible to change.
We've lost our sound there, Rachel. So hang on with us. We may have to come back to you in a moment for the final part of that. Hang on there. We'll come back to you when we've fixed it. Now, James, I'm going to get your views very shortly on this. However, Rachel McLean, I think we've fixed the sound. So I wanted to finish what you had to say. And obviously, you've heard what Zoe had to say. That, look, we do need to have a sensible conversation. But every time somebody like J.K. Rowling does conflate the issues of somebody who has broken the law, who is a vile sex pest, with being trans or not accepting, it does stir up hatred. And so until or unless we can have a sensible conversation that doesn't target people, we're just putting people at the margins.
I don't agree with the premise of your point there. I don't think J.K. Rowling is stirring up hatred. I think she's stating facts. I think she's pointing to various individuals who are men who are asking to be seen as women, and all she's saying is that they are not women. They are still men, and some of them are.
So what stage, but if you take the view, I understand that, but if you take the view that somebody can't transition from a man to a woman or a woman to a man, if you take that view, then you're never going to recognise that person for who they are, and you are dehumanising them.
No, you've misinterpreted my words. I said that somebody can't change biological sex. That's a different thing from somebody who's undergoing a process or wants to undergo a process and wants to identify as a different gender. They're two different things. Then they're not the same. I don't believe anybody can change sex. It's biologically impossible. But of course, I support the right of people that are protected under the laws of our country. And just from pure politeness and consideration, if somebody feels that they want to identify as a different gender, there are processes for them to do that. But at the same time, we can't just simply say that those people who've got concerns about single-sex spaces, safe spaces and sports and many, many areas of life are hateful or stirring up hate by pointing out obvious points, such as that is actually a man.
But then can't you see that
man can't be.
But you're saying, I understand, Rachel. You're saying all the things that you should say to avoid getting into trouble. But having said that, you're not addressing the core issue, which is if you do not accept that somebody can change sex, then it means that you are targeting them in the same way that you're calling out people for their sexuality or anything else because of what you think and what you think you should be able to tell them. That's not very considerate to the individual who's going through that process, is it?
Not at all. I'm on a TV programme. You're asking my view. If that person's sitting in front of me, and I would address them with extreme politeness, and I would respect the laws of the country that I live in, and that obviously I'm a member of Parliament, and I would extend the same courtesies and considerations to anybody that's sitting in front of me and asking me to look at them as an individual. Of course, I'm capable of separating those two things. They're not the same at all.
Okay, there we go, Rachel McLean. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Prime Time.